Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto 2 Blue Vortex video. This is going to be my speculation ahead of chapter 11, which I think is coming out on the 20th. So, as usual, I'm doing the speculation here shortly after the sneak peek page of the chapter has been released, so at least have a little bit of context. So if you haven't seen it yet, on the official Naruto website just earlier on today, they did put up the sneak peek page. So you can see here from chapter 11, coming in this month's V-Jump, we get the page. So first panel, big panel here, is Himawari in her kind of Jinchuriki form doing a tailed beast bomb. So very cool stuff here. Love the visuals here of the 9 tails of her hair, all focusing, creating this tailed beast bomb. Also, you kind of note here, I don't obviously get the sense that there's like an extreme level of anger or rage here. That it looks just like kind of intense concentration. So maybe the worry of like, oh, is she going to go completely wild here, lose it? You know, she's going to do some crazy stuff, obviously, but she seems mostly in control. So, Tail Beast Bomb is pretty notable. It's like, seems like potentially early on in the fight, she's just straight up going for it, suggesting that she's kind of advanced to a decent point by having the high affinity. So that's good. And then final panels here are that obviously Jura's in the air, maybe I'm guessing just before this, like she has launched him into the air, or he's retreating or something like that. But anyway, he responds by doing the thing he did in the last chapter, which is producing a tail beast ball himself from his eye, and he's going to kind of counter hers with his. So we're going to get a clash of these two tail beast bombs. So that will be interesting to see what the sort of like power kind of level between the two of them is. Does one of them get blown away or not? Will be quite interesting to see. But it confirms at the very least that it's not that like Jura immediately retreats upon seeing Himawari's form. No, there's going to be somewhat of an exchange of abilities here. We'll see how far it actually goes, because we don't get a page number here, so we don't know if this is from like the early section of the chapter, middle of the chapter, or maybe even the end of the chapter. But anyway, let's get into speculation here. So going back to chapter 10 for a second, just as a recap, one of the things we had was, of course, Sarada and Hidari meeting. So we have one of the Divine Tree characters actually meeting their target, and immediately she is attacked. She wins the first exchange here, but it's clearly not the full fight. It's just an exchange of Chidoris, which she manages to land a blow. But after this, the main focus is that this is where she first, I suppose, properly seems to recognize that, like, oh, he looks exactly like my father and has my father's techniques. What does this mean? And that seems to be where they're going to go on this side of the story. We get some detail reveals when it comes to the 9 tails, the fact that Himawari is a Jinchuriki. We find out that, okay, then they're still going with Kurama. It is Kurama. The details here are that they say there are a new version, but refers to like my previous self. So like, it's clearly a sense where like the characterization is slightly different, but like has knowledge of what they did in their kind of previous lives type situation there. So that's a bit of an interesting one. We also find out that Himawari has a higher chakra affinity with Kurama than Naruto did. So this is going to explain how, even though this is technically her first time ever using kind of Nine Tails chakra, why she probably has the ability to jump well ahead of like the early days of Naruto approaching using these abilities, that sort of idea. In terms of the big action, of course, we had the moment Jura breaking Himawari's leg, Inojin trying to like defend her, but getting viciously impaled by Jura, and this is what causes Himawari to attack, use the power of the 9 tails, and she appears in a kind of beast-like form, with her hair representing the 9 tails. She has the kind of eye kind of situation, that transformation that happens, and the whiskers are kind of emphasized. And that was the core of what was the takeaways from chapter 10. Like I said in my review, chapter 10 I thought was good, but I didn't think it was an incredible chapter. I thought it was a little bit slower. I don't think as much happened as probably I think should have happened, and we didn't quite get the levels of reveals that I wanted to, even though right at the end some pretty crazy stuff actually did happen right at the end, and that obviously in my mind kind of took the chapter to the point where yeah, it's still a good chapter. So then getting into some of the details here. So our obvious starting point for the next chapter is sort of how much of a fight are we going to get between Jura and Himawari, and how will it go? Because the point here is that both combatants are a portion of a 10 tails. In Himawari's case, it's a 9th of a 10 tails. That's what the tail beasts are. And then in the case of Jura, he is like a quarter of a 10 tails, but not quite, because we don't really know what the full situation is with kind of what's left of the 10 tails, but at the very least a notable portion of a 10 tails. So in terms of just that raw kind of breakdown, it should be okay, there's a sort of there's an equivalent kind of energy in a way powering each of these combatants. We'll see how it goes though, because Jura is sort of a present day kind of entity who we've seen defeat Kawaki, versus Himawari is technically, based on what we seem to see here, using potentially an earlier form of a Jinchuriki transformation here. Is this in the same ballpark at all? And I think they're probably going to really emphasize that Himawari's affinity with Kurama means that even though it's a technically earlier form that should be less powerful, her affinity with Kurama is going to make it somewhat equivalent. And I also think with Jura, they're going to use the fact that the Divine Tree characters are kind of inexperienced, that they there's a lot of stuff that they don't fully know exactly. Are they going to perform in battle in the perfect way, immediately go for the kill? Likely not. They're still learning. Other characters are still learning. That's the whole point here. But from a power perspective, Jura did pretty easily KO Kawaki. And in that sense, it's well, Kawaki's meant to be one of the more powerful characters in the series. Obviously, Demon is meant to be effectively the top. Boruto's kind of right up there now. We have to see what exactly the situation is here. So, in the preview, we see her. She seems to be in control. So what I said in my review towards the end was I'm worried in a way. Kurama seemed to kind of cheer her on for the idea, oh, you've totally lost control, but he seems to be happy that she's using the power. So I think this is more that's it, Himawari, cut loose, do something. Because her being in any way aggressive is kind of not what you maybe expect from her personality. So I think they're more emphasizing that than she's lost it here. We will be worried about Himawari and what happens here. No, I think it's just she needs to be a little bit intense because she's in a bit of a kind of wild beast style form. That's what's happening here. So I think that's kind of what we're going to see. We'll see if they approach doing anything like that, but I don't necessarily think so. Maybe towards the end there'll be a sense of okay, we've dealt with the problem, Himawari, you can calm down now, and will there be an issue there? I don't think so. I think they're taking Himawari as a Jinchuriki in a slightly different direction. There shouldn't be an issue here because she's on good terms with Kurama, and this is the Kurama who remembers the good relationship with Naruto, so there shouldn't be an issue. As for what I think specifically will happen, I do think she'll manage to hold out long enough against Jura that at the very least she might cause him to retreat if she's that powerful, or at the very least she'll be able to stay in the fight long enough for the likes of Kawaki and Delta, who we know are arriving, and maybe even a variety of other characters to arrive, and eventually Jura might be confronted by enough people where he might decide that it's just best to retreat for now and consider what to do next, because his initial plan of just coming to get Naruto, of course, has been completely ruined because he doesn't really know what's going on here. He's interested in Himawari, but this is not his target. He doesn't know where Naruto is. Is he going to return his attention to that at a certain point and realize that, okay, this is not quite the time to do this, because we're still ultimately waiting for some sort of a giant fight sequence of fights where all four Divine Tree characters are in play, and we're getting this sequence of everyone's fighting against their target, all the different groups of characters that are kind of connected to, you know, the person that the Divine Trees are based on fighting. That's not set up yet because Matsuri and the Bug Divine Tree are not here. They're not present at this point in time. So I think it's clear that this is more of a kind of setup, kind of teaser for something bigger that will happen at a later point. Because it feels like they're kind of presenting the idea of we're going to get a break from this at a certain point, but we'll see what happens here. Just on the other side of this, like the earlier parts of chapter 10, the explanation now of Himawari being a Jinchuriki. So they confirm like some obvious stuff, like I said at the start, that, okay, it is Kurama. They get across the idea that, okay, I guess Baryon mode was not as permanent as we maybe thought it was. They seem to double down on the idea of effectively you can never actually properly destroy the energy that makes up a tail beast. And they're almost implying that even if you do it down to the finest degree, a spark will form again somewhere, which is kind of what's happened here, and this is kind of where the mystery kind of still is, and that they don't actually give us an answer here. Even Kurama is kind of like, well, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, and even in this dialogue literally saying the how doesn't matter, which is a frustrating line of dialogue to hear as a fan, because I think most fans do want to know specifically why, in a way, Himawari kind of randomly just suddenly became a Jinchuriki, and what the exact specifics of this happening really are. Because the suggestions from Kurama are that, well, because you are the child of a previous Jinchuriki, maybe part of my chakra was passed on, and that's why the seed of, like, the kernel was kind of born in you. Maybe it's because you're from a notable bloodline, Uzumaki and Hyuga, and that's why you were destined to kind of have me kind of reborn in you. But they don't really commit to actually what the answer really is. Obviously there's going to be some interesting stuff about like the timing of this, in that like you now look back on some of the chapters from the end of part 1 of Boruto in terms of like, oh yeah, especially that scene with Demon and him noting that there's something special about her, and the timing of when that happened versus like what happened with Naruto. There's some stuff like that that's maybe interesting to talk about, but I'm waiting for the series to actually present what exactly happened with a lot of that stuff. And then I think this is a kind of interesting point, that like you can very much get distracted by the end of the chapter because of it's Himawari doing some really, really cool stuff, but it happened because Himawari kind of, to a certain degree, feels that has Inojin just been killed in front of her, and he's been so nice to her. So it was a kind of big character moment for Inojin, kind of getting to try and be kind of like the hero here, but it's clear he was not at the right level to face off against Jura, and so he gets like viciously impaled. To the point where it seems like Jura discovers like an edge of cruelty within himself, that like, oh, I like doing this, like impaling people and rising them up. This does feel like the sort of wound that you can't just hand wave away as it missed all the vital spots. It's not as serious as it looks. He is impaled straight through the stomach, and it seems like a giant spike here. He is dying, and we need to do something immediately to save his life. So I call it here, we need some kind of mega level healing here to save him. The obvious solution, because of course Himawari healed her own leg with her own powers, is does she give Ninetales chakra to Inojin and that just straight up heals him? The level of wound that this is seems a little bit crazy, that you can just distribute that much, a bit of chakra, and that happens. Even if you say it's like, oh, she's like an enhanced Jinchuriki because of the enhanced affinity, it still feels like a stretch that this potentially could be the solution. To me, I feel like the best option is that he has to be taken to Sakura or Tsunade, who I do believe should be able to save him because like they are the best medical ninjas in the village. Obviously, if they go this path, he's going to be out of action for a while, and you know this is why probably you are going to have to take a bit of a break, because there's no way you're doing the fight with Matsuri, the Moegi Divine Tree character, without one of the members of that team involved in it. So I do feel Inojin, of course, has to be saved. There's no way they're killing off the character at all. That didn't even cross my mind. But it's sort of, do we instantly deal with this, or is this like Inojin being horrendously injured? Is this the kind of main result of this first engagement with the Divine Tree characters? I think that could work. Like, they save his life because they get him to the right people, and I do think Sakura especially does need to be reintroduced, and because there is stuff happening with Sarada, and of course Sasuke is kind of involved in this because Hidari is based on Sasuke. It makes sense to, I think, do some of that family stuff here. So I would really like to see Sakura return as the healer of note here in this situation. Which brings us into Sarada versus Hidari. Again, he did attack her immediately, I think highlighting how much of a... they're evolving and becoming more intelligent, but the thing that really makes it clear that they are kind of originally like a beast, an animal, is that their want to attack their target, it seems like they can't not do that, basically. So this is the thing where you really see that this is a focus for these characters above all else, is getting their target. Clearly, this is not the time for this fight to happen in full. So the question is really, how much do they actually show here versus not show here? Because is it time to reveal Sarada's Mangekyo Sharingan powers, or are we going to more lean into the idea that this sequence here is where she more learns specifically about, oh, Hidari has trapped my father in a tree, and so this means he has his powers and stuff like that, and it'll be more of like her finally getting the full sense for what these characters actually are. But there's not much action in terms of showing off a lot of her abilities, because again, I think they're setting up that none of these fights are going to finish now, like in terms of the defeat of these villains. So I'm kind of wondering, might she get distracted by the truth of this, and maybe Sumire or Konohamaru, who are right there with her and Hidari, they might kind of jump in here to get a little bit of a moment here to sort of, in a way, save the Sarada reveals for more when we get to an actual fight. I think you probably need to show like a little bit more with Sarada. Maybe not the full-on major reveal here, because I think the Mangekyo stuff with her has to be treated really importantly. But we'll see what happens here, of course. Because again, Konohamaru, like, his fight shouldn't be against Hidari. It should be against Matsuri. So a few of the characters are kind of in the wrong positions as well. So that's another angle on this as well. And then the final point is just on Boruto, where for the last like 2 chapters, we really haven't addressed him. He's just kind of been there, like holding his hand, like, oh, the karma market's retreating, I just need to rest, stay away from the action. But they do emphasize that like it's a pretty serious situation, that like the fact that he had to retreat immediately, or something really bad would happen, and there's constant cuts to the toad on his shoulder, even Kashin Koji sort of acknowledging that you need to get away from this, highlights that I'm guessing something quite serious probably happened during Boruto's training, probably to explain why Boruto hasn't made any progress mastering the karma. And then, of course, the most interesting part with Boruto that we haven't addressed in Two Blue Vortex is Momoshiki. I believe it is still the case. Momoshiki hasn't really been addressed, particularly alluded to, since part 2 of the manga started. So we have to get back around to what's happening here and how big of a threat Momoshiki is. What's Momoshiki about? Because it seems like Boruto is past the sort of, like, I suppose we're kind of in the reaction to those eyes will take everything kind of from you, but have we seen all of Momoshiki's visions of the future for Boruto? Because Boruto is standing strong, and when is the characterization of this really going to happen? Because it seems like ahead of the big chapter 1, kind of page 1 sequence, Boruto does gain a certain amount of control over his karma. So how does that happen? When does that happen? And again, how does Momoshiki play a role in all of this? They really have, it's been notable, the lack of mention of Momoshiki. That Boruto and Two Blue Vortex has been introduced with almost an entirely new skill set, kind of ignoring some of the things that he was maybe known for in part 1. Why is that the case? What did they figure out trying to train him, maybe to learn karma stuff? That's going to be interesting to see. Is there going to be time in this chapter to do it, or is this going to be more of a reveal coming up? I'm not entirely sure, because what it does highlight is that Boruto has to stay away from Kawaki, and he, even though he's more powerful than Kawaki, he can't challenge Kawaki until he gains control of this thing. So this creates a bit of separation between the two main characters, why we can't just do the obvious thing now. But it does mean there's still a little bit to go. So in terms of series structure, I guess it does mean we deal with the Divine Tree characters first, and then we get to the Kawaki Boruto stuff, which probably is the right way to do it overall, I think. So, yeah, they're my thoughts heading into the next chapter. I would say I'm not expecting chapter 11 to be sort of maybe mind-blowing in terms of, like, reveals and all this sort of stuff. I expect it to be mostly, like, some solid action, but acknowledging that the big fights are probably going to have to wait for later on. They're obviously going to show us a little bit of what Himawari can do in this Jinchuriki form. I'm very intrigued to see how far they go with Sarada in terms of, like, showing what her skill set is at this point. And then actually I think of maybe a surprise one is just the exact details of how they approach dealing with the injury to Inojin is going to be quite interesting. But again, a lot depends on, are we going to have, like, the villains retreat this chapter, next chapter, chapter after that? Because Inojin being, like, mortally wounded here, and I'm calling it that because it seems crazy not to consider it that way. You need to deal with that quick. That can't just be put aside for multiple chapters. He's just bleeding out over there. We have to do something with him straight away. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are going into chapter 11. And otherwise, yes, I will attempt to get my review out the day the chapter releases on the 20th, I believe. And I will see you then. But yes, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.